Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer's name became known for his fraudulent schemes back in the 20th century. The story of German adventurer Christian, more familiarly known by the alias Karl. He was born in West Germany on February 21, 1961, but he himself claimed to have been born on February 29, 1960. His parents' names are Simon and Ermengarde. They are a painter and seamstress, and they have another son, Alexander. The family was needy and poor. Karl grew up in the Bavarian land in the German commune of Siegsdorf. This place is remarkable and beautiful because of its large forests, snow-capped mountaintops. The population of the town is not very large, a little more than 8,000 inhabitants. Everyone knows each other. But little Karl never liked it. He liked to be surrounded by people, and to be a leader there, all the attention should be attached to his person. At school, he was fond of chemistry and electronics. He was a very smart child. Karl's main goal was to move to the United States to become a Hollywood star there. When Karl was 17 years old, he met American tourists Elmer and Jean Cologne. The family was traveling through West Germany. They told the young lad about their country and how beautiful it was. For Karl, this acquaintance was a huge success. These stories further solidified the goal of going to the United States. From that moment began the fascinating story of Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer, which is full of lies and crimes. To enter the States, Karl used the names of tourists and registered as a high school scholarship applicant and that he was an exchange student. And this first deception succeeded, he was believed, and the U.S. Embassy issued a visa to enter the countries. That was 1978. The next destination was New York. For this he traveled to Connecticut, where he chose as his first victim the family of Edward Sage. To them, he introduced himself as Christian Gerhardt Reiter and told them that he came from a wealthy West German family. From that moment on, his first experience in creating a fake identity began. Edward and his family believed Karl and allowed him to stay with them while he was going through high school. He stayed with the Sage family for a year, but they were forced to say goodbye to him as Karl had exhausted their patience. Karl did not become discouraged, much less return home, and in 1980, he went to Hollywood to fulfill his childhood dream and become an actor. But it did not work out, and a year later, he came to the north of America, Milwaukee, located in the state of Wisconsin. There he called himself Christopher Kenneth Gerhardt. Karl entered the University of Wisconsin. There he met his future wife, 22-year-old Amy Jersey Donkey. A short time later, through another lie, Karl married Amy and gained American citizenship. His lie was that he convinced his girlfriend that he needed citizenship. If he didn't get it, he would have to go back home to West Germany, where Karl would be taken into the army and sent to fight in the Cold War on the Russian front. The day after the wedding, Karl left his young wife and went to California. Amy immediately filed for divorce, indicating that Karl had abandoned her. In 1984, Karl was living in the city of San Marino, which is located in Los Angeles County. There, he identified himself as Christopher Chichester. He took the last name from a teacher he had in high school. Karl met the family of Jonathan and Linda Sohus and immediately moved into their home. It was the same as with the previous victims. Karl wormed his way into the trust of this family. Karl kept in touch with his family for a while, and in a phone conversation with his mother, he told her that he had changed his last name because it was difficult for Americans to pronounce his German last name, Gerhardtsreiter. At some point, he stopped making contact. In his hometown, rumors began to fly about Karl, that he had opened his own company in the States. But in fact, Karl had nothing. He lived off his deceived victims. Everyone believed in Karl's deception, but in 1985, something strange and inexplicable happened. The Sohus couple disappeared. When the investigation began, Karl was detained behind the wheel of a truck that belonged to Jonathan, but the police never got to question him. He managed to leave the neighborhood. During the investigation, Karl was seen as a person of interest in finding the Sohus couple. He had been telling neighbors that Jonathan and Linda had gone on a trip to Europe. The proof was a postcard the Sohus had received. There was no evidence for recognizing that the couple was dead. Karl remained at large. Karl's next destination was Greenwich, and he moved there, calling himself by a new name, Christopher Crowe, and that he was a television producer from Los Angeles. In fact, there was such a producer. He created the famous 80s television series Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Karl introduced himself as a descendant of the English royal house. The fraudster had not only courage, but also the ability to learn languages and acting talent. Therefore, He easily perfected American English and began to wear clothes from famous brands. It remains unknown where he got the money for all this, but most likely he got it through fraudulent schemes. Later, Carl got a job working with computers in a famous brokerage firm, Phelps and Company. But it quickly became clear that Carl was not who he claimed to be, and that he was not a descendant of an English house. The truth was revealed thanks to a social security number. The insurance number Carl gave belonged to serial killer David Berkowitz. Christian Carl was immediately fired. Next, Carl took a job at Nico Securities as a corporate bond sales manager. But just as quickly, he was fired from there. His next job was with another brokerage company, but later he quit there on his own. After a while, he learned that he was wanted by the police, immediately gave up the name Christopher Crow, and to his former colleagues he told the story that his parents were kidnapped abroad and he needs to go there to negotiate a ransom and achieve their freedom. A few years passed, and Clark invented a new interesting story. He became Clark Rockefeller. This identity did not need to certify and explain, because with this name, he was open to all the doors of high society in New York. He told everyone that he was a member of this dynasty of oil magnates and knew German very well, even though he had never been to Germany. He also claimed that his parents had died in an accident. Clark also said that he was an independent banker and that his income came from several Asian countries. No one even doubted his story. Everyone believed him. Carl boasted that he had alleged friendships with various artists, businessmen, and politicians, including George Lucas, Britney Spears, and German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. He also claimed to possess the master key to all the buildings in Rockefeller Center and that he was in charge of the new bond department at the Wall Street Bank. To confirm his wealth, he claimed to live in a luxurious apartment with paintings of his favorite artist, Mark Rothko, hanging on the walls. Naturally, all the paintings were fakes, but no one dared to ask Carl to show certificates of authenticity because he claimed to have inherited them from his great-aunt Blanche, the widow of John Rockefeller III. This story had enough impact on Sandra Boss, who fell in love with Carl and fell into his trap of deception. Sandra was a high-ranking executive of the consulting firm McKinsey & Company, who was educated at Harvard and Stanford. Clark Rockefeller and Sandra Boss married in 1955. Clark was then referred to as James Frederick Mills Clark Rockefeller. The actual ceremony was legally invalid. It was unfair to Sandra since Carl never gave out the information and his real identity. Carl insisted that Sandra file her tax return as a single person, rather than as a family, to get a more favorable tax break. Sandra was the only source of income, but even so, Carl hired an accountant to handle the company's finances without including Sandra in the process, and only he handled her earnings. From the looks of it, Clark and Sandra were a very happy family, living in a luxurious home in New Hampshire. In 2011, Sandra and Clark had a daughter, Ray. New Hampshire used his fictional family connections to the Rockefeller family. He also revealed that he was a wealthy Yale graduate and currently owned a business in Canada. He used his charisma to become a member of a prestigious Boston club, where he spent most of his time impressing everyone with his promising affairs and superior wealth. However, the truth was that all this money belonged to his wife, and the con man managed it to live the royal life, surrounded by luxury, fancy cars, clothes from fashionable brands, and many other accessories of wealth. He came up with the perfect excuse in front of his wife and private club friends. They said his fortune was trapped during the Cold War, and he could not return to save his fortune, since returning to Germany meant he would be forced to serve in the army. Due to his character, Carl successfully won people over with his charm and amazed them with his incredible stories. But as time went on, all his lies began to come out. From his greed, he became more emotional and angry. Carl accused Sandra of making very little money for them. After such accusations, Sandra began to suspect that her husband Clark Rockefeller's story was very strange and mysterious, and she hired a private detective to find out the whole truth. He succeeded. He found out that Carl is not who he says he is. At the time, no one knew his real name. After receiving this information in 2006, Sandra decided to divorce, officially changed her daughter's name, and accused Carl of lying about his connection to the Rockefeller family. Members of this dynasty denied any connection to Carl. Due to the situation, Carl decided to capitalize on it for himself. He agreed to give custody of his daughter to Sandra, and he himself had the opportunity to see her only 3 times a year. and that under supervision. In exchange for this, Sandra agreed to pay Carl $800,000, give him 2 cars and her wedding ring, which was fixed in the agreement. Carl's mistake, which led to his exposure, happened after his divorce from Sandra. Carl's ex-wife moved to London with their daughter. There, Carl could only see his daughter 3 times a year under certain conditions that were stipulated in the divorce agreement. During one of these meetings on July 27, 2008, Ray and her nanny went for a walk in Boston. At one point, a limousine pulled up beside them. Carl got out of the limousine, walked briskly toward the daughter and the nanny, pushed her away very roughly, and forcibly took Ray into the car with him. The nanny tried to stop the limo with her own strength. She tried to hold the car with her hands, but she ended up being dragged a few meters and fell. Charles ordered his driver to drive faster, and they managed to get out of sight just as quickly. Under his new name, Charles Smith, he bought an apartment where he brought his daughter Ray. To the public, he began to present himself as a single father who came from Chile. His ex-wife immediately went to the police, where she reported that her daughter had been kidnapped. After Sandra's statement, the police immediately went in search of Carl. An Amber Alert was issued for the child's disappearance, and the Baltimore Police Department also filed a manhunt for the fake Clark Rockefeller. During the search, it was discovered that Carl had a yacht that was parked in a marina under the care of the owner of that marina. The owner recognized Carl from the wanted photos and notified the police. The police officers decided to go for a ruse and lure the scammer out to the marina. To do this, they contacted him and informed him that the yacht was sinking. All this happened on August 2nd, a week after the kidnapping of the child. After the call, Carl got ready to go to the harbor, and when he left the apartment, Boston police officers stopped him. Ray was found in the apartment alive and unharmed. The kidnapper was taken to police where he was charged with kidnapping a child against her will, as well as an assault charge. But Carl was not intimidated by anything. He still made up new stories as well and claimed his mother was an American child actress from the 40s, Ann Carter, and also claimed she was dead. It was all made up again. This story was publicly denied by Ann Carter herself. The kidnapping of the child caused a great resonance, and the case was widely publicized in the media. Pictures of Carl were distributed everywhere. After that, witnesses began to appear who recalled the false stories. He was also recognized by his own brother, Alexander. The FBI tried to find out about Clark Rockefeller's background and the real details of his past life through the media with a video that asked agents to tell the true identity of the man. On August 15, 2008, officially the FBI, Massachusetts State Police, Boston Police Department, and Suffolk County District Attorney made an announcement that Clark Rockefeller has the real name Christian Carl Gerhartsreiter. They found this out with the help of the FBI laboratory in the Virginia town of Quantico and forensic examinations there. Boston police lifted Clark's fingerprints in custody. The prints were matched to others they had gotten from various sources, and they matched prints taken in Boston from a wine glass. They were collected during the search for Rhea and Carl. The task was as difficult as possible. It was necessary to trace Carl's entire path all the way back to early childhood. The investigation found a fascinating immigration file that began in the 1980s. The lab was able to identify latent prints on this file. It also found additional evidence that had gotten lost among the 1984 case file, the case of the disappearance of the Sohus couple. This evidence helped to finally bring this tangled story to a close. Investigators discovered that Carl was not only a con man, but also a very dangerous man. The new owners of the Sohus home where the alleged oil tycoon lived started building a pool, dug a hole in the backyard, and found 3 bags there, most likely containing human remains. Forensic examination proved that the bones belonged to Jonathan Sohus. At the time, the couple's son Sohus stated that Carl had always taken advantage of his parents. The body of Linda Sohus was never found. Police claimed that Linda was also murdered, as well as Jonathan. Also, the police speculated that Carl did all this to cover his tracks and so that no one would know his real identity. Carl still continued to maintain that he was innocent. On September 3, 2008, Carl was charged with providing a false fake name to a law enforcement officer at the time of his arrest. A month later, Carl's attorney asked the judge to consider a motion to reduce Carl's bail. At the time, bail was set at $50 million. The motion was denied, and the court announced the decision to revoke the possibility of bail altogether. In mid-2009, a trial began in Boston. where Carl was to be charged with kidnapping his daughter, assault, and assault with a firearm. But as it turned out, another charge of providing false identification was added. The trial was presided over by Judge Frank Gano, and he prohibited prosecutors from mentioning the Sohus missing persons case to avoid prejudicing the jury against defendant Carl. Carl's defense stated that their client was most likely mentally disturbed, proven by the fact that Carl believed that his daughter Ray called him from London and begged him to save her. Two experts diagnosed the defendant with delusional disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. Dr. Kate Abloh, who was one of the experts, stated that Carl had told her about his father's psychological abuse as a child. The evidence of Carl's attorneys was contradicted by Dr. James Chu, a psychiatrist who was on the prosecution side. The psychiatrist also announced that although he diagnosed a personality disorder with narcissistic and antisocial traits, Carl was able to distinguish good from bad, and vice versa. James stated that Carl planned the kidnapping of the child in great detail, and if he had been mentally ill, he would not have been able to think it through. At the trial, Carl exercised his right to remain silent, and his ex-wife spoke instead. She said that in the beginning of the relationship between the spouses, everything was fine, but later he began to control every step and accused her of not earning enough. She also said that after these words, she decided to check the words of her ex-husband for truthfulness, and her investigation led to the disclosure of several serious cases at once. Not only Sandra spoke out, but the limo driver also spoke out. He laughed at Carl and called him extremely strange. On the day Carl stole his daughter, he paid the driver $3,000 to help him drive him and his daughter home. On June 12, 2009, a jury found Carl guilty of unlawful imprisonment of a child and one count of assault and assault with a dangerous weapon, which was a limousine. On the second count of assault and providing a false identification, Carl was acquitted. Judge Frank Gano sentenced Carl to 4 to 5 years in prison for kidnapping the girl, and 2 to 3 years on the assault charges, which were to run concurrently. Although the first trial went quickly, the case that involved the Sohus couple was slower. The first grand jury was convened in the spring of 2009 to only consider evidence of Carl's guilt. The next session didn't take place until 2 years later, in the spring of 2009. That's when the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office charged Carl with the murder of Jonathan Sohus. It wasn't until March 2013 that the trial began. Carl's defense, represented by attorney Jeffrey Denner, argued that Linda Sohus took the life of her spouse Jonathan, as his client had no motive to get rid of Jonathan. And he also claimed that the crime would have been the stupidest crime in Southern California history because the packages in which Jonathan's remains were placed were packages from the universities Carl attended. But Assistant District Attorney Javid Valian disagreed with the defense attorney's arguments and noted that if the motives for the crime are unknown, it does not absolve the defendant of guilt. According to prosecutors, Carl was believed to be involved in the deaths and had evaded trial for 30 years. The evidence in the case was mostly circumstantial, but the jury, however, felt that the 2 packages that were found with the remains were strong enough evidence. Since the packages were from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and the other from the University of Southern California, where the defendant was a student. That wasn't the only evidence. There were also witness statements and police records that noted that Carl stole Jonathan's car after committing the crime. It wasn't until April 10th that the trial was completed. The jury reached a verdict in which they said Carl was guilty of first-degree murder, and the aggravating factor of using a deadly weapon to take the victim's life was added. When Carl was found guilty, he fired his attorneys, and during sentencing he defended himself on his own, insisting he was innocent. On August 15, 2013, Christian Carl Gerhartsreiter's sentencing hearing was held in Los Angeles Superior Court. Judge George Lamelli denied the defendant's petition for a new trial and sentenced Carl to life in a maximum security prison with a minimum term of 27 years, after which Carl could apply for parole, and he was eligible to reduce the minimum sentence to 26 years for past time served on a child kidnapping charge. Members of the Sohus family were present at the trial and were allowed to express their opinions after the verdict was announced. Jonathan's sister took the floor and addressed Carl, telling him that she was sure of her involvement in Linda's death, even if he was never proven guilty. And she also stated that she was satisfied with the judge's ruling. Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter was placed in Norrkern State Prison in September 2013 and was transferred to Ironwood State Prison in March 2014 for unknown reasons. In 2015, Karl appealed and his sentence was reduced to 26 years. But this was not enough for him, and he filed 2 more appeals on October 23, 2015 and January 20th, 2016, which were unsuccessful. No more appeals can be filed by Karl as he has exhausted all state remedies. In December 2016, Karl was placed in San Quentin State Prison, where he remains today. When he is 68 years old, he will be eligible for parole. That won't happen until December 2029. In spite of everything, Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter became a kind of real star of cinematography, as he dreamed in childhood. Only he himself did not star in a movie, and on his life story made movies, from which box office receipts amounted to about $6 million. Karl still continues to insist on his innocence in the accused crime, and even gave several interviews where he claimed it. It is no secret that the rich love to throw lavish parties. Representatives of the elite come to the luxurious house. Artists, officials, businessmen, and many other people. At one such event occurred acquaintance Bob Angleton and Doris. It turned out that the organizer of the feast is their mutual friend. At the time, Doris was 28 years old and Robert was 31, and both were married, each in his own marriage. However, this fact did not embarrass them. The guy behaved persistently, confidently, even on the verge of insolence. And this was very much liked by the relaxed and sociable girl, besides slightly intoxicated with expensive wine. The couple's relationship was developing rapidly. Doris and Bob spent a lot of time together and optimally complemented each other's missing qualities. She was sociable, had many acquaintances and friends. He, for the most part, limited himself to socializing with business associates, outside of work contact with someone quite rarely. In 1982, the couple got married. The wedding turned out gorgeous in accordance with the status of the bride and groom. 3 more years later, they had twin girls. Their parents named them Nikki and Ellie. Having concluded an official marriage, the newlyweds almost a week later moved to downtown Houston in the elite neighborhood of River Oaks. There were more than 3,000 luxury homes here. They were built after the economic breakthrough in the state, called the oil boom. At that time, many citizens, on whose plots were found sources of black gold, and those who invested in the oil industry, became rich. Premium cars, huge mansions, golf courses, and even a few helipads are typical of the area. To this day, the real estate here is purchased by representatives of the beau monde, including the stars of show business. Bob and Doris began their life in this neighborhood in 1982. In 1985, their family grew with the addition of twin daughters. Business was going great and steady. Dad and Mom had impressive profits. The children studied in a prestigious school. And so it continued until 1997. Having become the head of the family, the man made himself responsible for all financial components, and he created a superficial picture of a successful man with a well-developed legal business, his own tennis club and golf course with an elite clientele, a plot of land in Colorado, assets built up on real estate. In fact, all of the incoming cash flow was illegal, and Angleton's financial triumphs came from his bookmaking operation, and sports betting alone brought in $10 million a year, plus royalties on any bet. According to average estimates, such a law-abiding husband had a personal annual income as a bookie from $2 million. And no one could thoroughly determine what sums were at Bob's disposal, not even his spouse. Subsequently, it turned out that he more than once realized hidden financial transfers and machinations in which representatives of the mafia were involved. The external family idol and prosperity turned out to be a picture for outsiders. Bob became more and more immersed in his business, devoting less time to his wife. He was often away. She was bored and found ecstasy in the AOL chat rooms. That's where she met her lover. He introduced himself to her as a broker for a successful stock exchange in New Jersey. Their connection quickly turned into a stormy romance. In the beginning of 1998, Doris demanded from her husband a divorce. Bob did not protest, and soon the marriage was officially dissolved. After that, the spouses still lived together for some time for the sake of the children. Then, the ex-husband received limited time to stay together with Ellie and Nikki. For example, he would take his daughters to sports matches and bring them back. A pattern and schedule was established for him to spend time with them. On April 16th, Robert and his daughters attended a local softball game. At approximately 9:30 p.m., he brought them home. As he pulled up to the house, he noticed an open door. In addition, the dog did not run out to greet them. The man suspected something was wrong and called 911. He told the operator that he was afraid to go into the house with his daughters and that his wife was not responding to his call. Police arrived at the address 15 to 20 minutes later. Officers entered the house. Robert remained outside, and the daughters were in the car. Police officers found Doris's dead body in a narrow hallway going into the kitchen and a mass of scattered shell casings near her. The woman had been brutally murdered with multiple gunshots to her back and side. Experts later determined that Doris was hit by 13 bullets. The perpetrator had used 2 magazines or used 2 guns, or there were at least 2 perpetrators. Ammunition also complicated the investigation. All the bullets found were exploding bullets. Therefore, it was not possible to identify which weapon had fired them. During the initial search, the officers found no signs of robbery. The kitchen cabinets were closed, jewelry, money, and equipment in their places. In addition, on that fateful evening, for some reason, the alarm system with internal motion indicators did not go off. All the facts pointed to one thing. Doris herself was the target of the criminal, or criminals. Her murder had been done professionally, leaving no trace or evidence. The question remained, who prevented the mother, housewife, and socialite? The first suspect was her husband, but he was at the match with the children that night, providing himself an alibi for 100%. Of course, he could have hired a hitman, but this version turned out to be unprovable. And the subsequent investigation led the police to more than one dead end. After the incident, the sisters were immediately sent to a relative's home. Their father was summoned by the police for questioning at the station. So far, the terrible news was kept from the girls. For the police, Robert was the #1 suspect, as detectives primarily considered the domestic version a murder motivated by a family quarrel. And even a 100% alibi did not save the husband of the murdered woman from police suspicion. The officers asked Bob to detail the events of that evening in chronological order, and the algorithm he laid out came out as follows. At 7:45 p.m., he arrived at the stadium with the girls. Later, about 15 minutes later, Doris drove up to them. After 15-20 minutes, she left the sports facility and headed home to put on another outfit. The wife was supposed to return 10 minutes later, but she didn't. The match was over, and she was still gone. And no answer to her home phone calls. At about 9:10 p.m., Bob, worried, drove home. At about 9:30 p.m., he arrived at the house and saw the door open and called the police. The next stage in the interrogation is to voice suggestions as to the perpetrator of the murder, and possibly even the person who ordered it. Robert was at first confused by the dilemma, but then agreed to voice a few ideas, but only with the recorder turned off. The staff complied with such a simple request, and the interrogator admitted to working as a bookie. Such a position in Las Vegas would not have raised a question, but in Texas in the 1980s, it was illegitimate. The second fact revealed surprised the police even more. It turned out that Robert cooperates with the Department of Vice in the city of Houston and provides information about the work of other underground bookmakers. The man suggested that someone from the sphere of shady betting found out about his interaction with the police and took revenge on him by brutalizing his wife. Bob's testimony needed to be verified. Detectives contacted the former head of Vice, Kevin Tempton. He confirmed his cooperation with Angleton and the systematic receipt of valuable information from him on the gambling underground. Tempton added that because of regular snitching in the field of betting, Bob was not respected because of him created a risk of collapse of a profitable business. And Angleton was repeatedly threatened by colleagues. However, words remained words, and intimidation was not embodied. And in practice, the greatest danger to Robert was his own older brother, Roger, a difference of 6 years. In childhood and adolescence, they were quite close, and a little later, they had a joint business in Florida, a small family restaurant. However, the business did not thrive for long, and about 6 months later, the institution had to close due to losses. Then the brothers rushed to Texas. In this state, both achieved success, each in his own niche. Roger focused on real estate transactions, and Bob became interested in selling used cars. Gradually, the brotherly alliance was weakening, and money was to blame. Roger's business was falling apart because of low demand for apartments and modest houses, and mansions were sold by more successful realtors. At the same time, Robert went into the bookmaking business and offered his brother to work for him in such a lucrative field, albeit underground. Roger agreed, and gradually his life was getting better. However, his appetite grew, and he demanded more and more fees. Bob was not satisfied with such arrangements, and he fired his arrogant brother. So their relationship was transformed into a feud. Roger gave an ultimatum: either he receives a payment of $250,000 or inform the police and the tax service about the shady bookmaking brother. Kevin Templeton even provided the police with a threatening letter, which allegedly Roger addressed to Robert. The essence of the appeal: payment of the specified amount by March 1997, otherwise severe measures will follow, by which we can mean various things, including murder. In addition, Angleton Sr. was experiencing serious health problems at the time and was heavily addicted to painkillers. He was on the edge of despair and admitted that he had nothing left to lose. On the day of Doris's death, there was a court hearing where Roger was supposed to appear and testify, but he never showed up in court. The reason for his absence was not clear, and this fact only increased the suspicions of the investigators. So, they audited all of Angleton Sr.'s credit card transactions. This audit revealed the following facts about Roger. He traveled to Texas several times in the 2 months before the tragic evening. 5 days before the murder, he rented an apartment in Houston. The day before Doris's death, he rented 2 cars and didn't return them, not even 2 weeks later. However, such behaviors did not yet make Roger a prime suspect in the murder. But one way or another, he had to be questioned, and he would explain the nature of that threatening letter and other nuances. Bob's older brother disappeared, which slowed down the investigation a bit. But when he escaped, he left obvious traces. Checking in at the Dallas airport for a flight to Houston under a false first and last name. The manager offered him an earlier flight, on the condition that he forego baggage and take only carry-on luggage. 10 days after Doris's murder, he showed up in Las Vegas, where he married someone named Jennifer. In the same city, he tried to check into a hotel under false documents. Remarkably, at the airport security checkpoint, items claiming to be key evidence in the Doris murder case were found in his bag. A pair of .22 caliber handguns. Their bullets matched those found at the scene of the tragedy. Several wigs, hair dye, dark glasses, a compact tape recorder. After such finds, security showed special attention to Roger, but he somehow miraculously escaped from the airport, leaving there a bag with these things. When checking into a hotel in Las Vegas, the porter suspected something wrong and called the police. Roger was arrested for using a fake passport and driver's license. Also added to the charges was a felony for failing to appear in a California court. Basically, these are petty misdemeanors. And for them, he was booked into the Las Vegas County Jail. That's where Houston investigators found him. An important suspect was found. They also searched his hotel room. They found the following: cash totaling over $60,000, a notebook with codes to disable the alarm system at the Angleton house, detailed instructions for Doris's murder. For example, it included when to let the dog out of the house and when and how to shoot the victim and how to leave the scene. A receipt for the amount of money to be paid, a notebook with a plan of action in case Roger is caught, how to behave, what to say to the investigators, an audio tape of 2 men talking. The dialogue included a discussion of how to disable the alarm system and how to kill Doris and take the money from the house and what to do to the dog if it barked loudly. The cops gave several $1,000 bills to the experts, and one bill had Robert Angleton's fingerprints on it. The quality of the audio was poor, and some of the phrases the detectives could hardly make out. Of the two voices on the tape, one belonged to Roger, and the other most likely to Bob. With this evidence in hand, investigators charged the Angleton brothers with first-degree murder in October 1997. The police were left in no doubt that the younger brother was the orderer and the older brother the perpetrator. It's no secret that Doris's relationship with Bob has deteriorated lately, plus he's been having an affair on the side. On April 11th, she turned 46 years old. On this occasion, a lavish party was organized. On it, Robert and Doris communicated quite closely and warmly, and their friends even suggested that the divorce was canceled. And 5 days later, the woman was murdered in her home. In the process of investigation, experts found out that the dissolution of the marriage was not favorable to Bob, so would have revealed all his underground machinations, which would be interested in the tax service. That's the perfect motive to eliminate his wife. However, Robert did everything to show how he did not want to divorce. Sent Doris huge bouquets of flowers, love notes, invitations to a romantic trip, etc. He also stopped being jealous of her when he went somewhere without explanation, controlling her steps. All in all, visually, he became a model and compliant adorer. Doris, however, found her cherished freedom from her husband and allowed herself various intrigues on the side. On her life path, there was a new man with whom she saw her future. All of Robert's attempts to save the marriage failed, and in February 1997, the wife filed for divorce. Doris asked to divide their joint money stored in safes in 6 banks. Bob agreed. The spouses accumulated $3 million and distributed them to keep $500,000 each in 6 banks. During the investigation, detectives determined that the bookie had kept more safe deposit boxes containing serious sums and withheld it from his wife. When Doris received her $1.5 million, she hired a private accountant to handle the account. She had lost trust in her spouse and other men regarding the financial component, and the hired professional would help her control her expenses and income. The man's black streak was prolonged. He was foolishly caught at the airport and with false documents at the hotel. Such stresses could not help but take their toll on his already compromised health. His cardiovascular system left much to be desired. While in prison in Las Vegas, he repeatedly complained of heart pains and asked for necessary medications. However, he did not receive them in the right amount. He had a heart attack, and he was taken from prison under escort to a nearby hospital where he underwent emergency surgery. Before he'd recovered sufficiently, he was charged with the murder of Doris Angleton, and his condition deteriorated dramatically. Heart failure was killing the man, and to put himself out of his misery, he decided to commit suicide. The weapon of choice was a disposable razor. Roger's body was found by prison guards one morning, with wounds on his wrists. The autopsy confirmed previous medical diagnoses. Serious heart failure. The man wouldn't have lived long with it, and any day could have been his last. No wonder the patient decided to take his own life. All of this happened before the trial, and the investigation lost its prime suspect. However, there were still questions about the second suspect. A suicide note was found next to Roger's body in the cell. In it, he assured that Robert was not involved in the death of his wife. It was a revenge killing by his older brother, and the other evidence was fabricated by the investigators. In researching Roger's last days, police discovered that he was in frequent contact with crime writer Vanessa Legault. Their dialogues were strictly confidential and lasted for hours. In them, the prisoner shared information about the plot to eliminate Doris. He told in detail all the facts with one condition: no publication of them for the end of the investigation and court hearings. Lego agreed to this barter, and the tapes of all their conversations were carefully boxed up, duct-taped in several turns, and hidden away. When Doris received her $1.5 million, she hired a private accountant to handle the account. She had lost trust in her spouse and other men regarding the financial component. and the hired professional would help her control her expenses and income. The only person left in the case is Bob Angleton. The state's most popular defense attorney, Mike Ramsey, took on his defense. The prosecutors built their case on the basis of that tape recording of two male voices discussing the murder. Technology at the time couldn't improve the quality of the tape, so they had to work with that sound. An independent acoustics and sound expert was brought in to identify the second speaker. The first was Roger. The expert determined that the probability of the voice belonging to Robert Angleton was 20%. This was not enough for the court because 100% was needed to build an ironclad conviction. At the time, the identity of the second participant in the dialogue from the recording remained unknown, but it was obvious that this person knew all the codes from the alarm system and the victim's detailed daily routine and where to lock the dog to avoid barking and noises. The investigation was never able to identify the culprit, and the reason for that was poor sound cleaning equipment, and many words of the mysterious interlocutor could not be understood. The defense brought in Bob's daughters as witnesses, who were 14 years old at the time. Ellie claimed that the second voice on the audio recording was making silly statements. After all, the whole family and their close friends knew that it was useless to lock the dog in the bathroom. The animal had learned to open the door in that room. Nikki added that the man whose voice was heard on the tape in the conversation with Roger expressed himself with an accent different from their father's vocabulary. Plus, it was a family tradition to name each room. And the mysterious stranger had mixed up all the names and locations of the rooms. Therefore, the girls were 100% sure that the recording was the voice of a man they did not know. The prosecution, however, claimed that it was Robert who had hired Roger to kill them. He cautiously entered the house and fired erratically with 2 handguns. And 13 bullets hit Doris. The defense responded with its own argument. Roger didn't show up at the house alone. There were 2 shooters, and they were traveling in 2 rental cars. And the voice on the audio recording is that of an accomplice in a terrible crime, but definitely not Robert Angleton. The lawyer also reminded the court that Roger had a weak psyche, was excessively fond of espionage and political intrigue. On the grounds of financial insolvency, large debts, and quarrel with his brother, he went to conspiracy and murder for revenge. And the evidence we've found that points to Robert is a clever fabrication, like the same bill with the prints on it. It could have been given to his brother by Bob much earlier for his work in the office. And the notes that were found, supposedly written by Robert, were left in the bag that was searched by the police. In addition, Roger had planted evidence on purpose, various false passports, things to change his appearance, receipts, and so on. That's what he admitted to in his suicide note. And the investigation had no direct evidence that the Angletons had made phone calls or sent letters to each other. The trial continued for 8 days. Then the jury deliberated for 4 days to reach a verdict. And their verdict was unanimous. Robert Angleton was not guilty of Doris's murder. However, the man became a figurehead in other cases. And for the next 2 years, the FBI filed a case against him for shady bookmaking, expecting that he would again engage in this activity. Also, the FBI planned to launch its own investigation into the murder of Doris Angleton. They brought in higher-level experts to transcribe the tape and used better technology to digitize the tape. And they would have gotten the case if they proved that Bob had hired Roger from out of state. But the defendant's activities were limited to Texas. The feds insisted on a reinvestigation and argued that they would have had full proof that the second voice belonged to Robert Angleton. The agents found out that Roger was in close contact with Vanessa Legault and paid her a visit. They demanded to know what information they had, but the writer refused to give the court the material. In response to this protest, she was imprisoned for 6 months. The woman served her time, but never provided the FBI with any records. The feds never obtained potential evidence against Robert for the murder of his wife. But they did get him on other charges: tax evasion, possession of a firearm. They seized more than $3.2 million from the defendant's safe deposit boxes and had no doubts about proving his guilt of illegitimate profiteering. However, Robert repaid the debt to the tax structure and went to wait for new court hearings. The feds believed that he would sit at home, but Angleton outsmarted them, took took the money from their stashes and fake passports and rushed to the Netherlands. At the airport in Houston, he managed to board a plane, but at passport control in Amsterdam, experts figured out the fraud and the police arrested him. He was to be held in custody and await extradition to the US. The Dutch court scrupulously studied Angleton's case and ruled that the defendant could not be prosecuted a second time under the Article for Deprivation of Life. The basis for the verdict is the Double Jeopardy Act, and Robert's extradition to America meant that he would not be tried for murder in the States. And this would only be possible when he had served his due sentences for other crimes. It was September 2004, and Angleton was again caught failing to pay his taxes. He now owed $1.4 million. That's the amount of his earnings from acquittal to his second incarceration. He also recalled the use of a false passport on a flight to another country. Bob served 8 years for these acts and was released in 2012. Since then, the press lost interest in him, and his name was no longer in the newspapers. The federal prosecutor's office said that thanks to Angleton's extradition, a new case under a more serious article. Again, it involved murder. Allegedly, he killed someone a month after his release. Other charges were planned, but the cases never developed. Robert Angleton disappeared. His whereabouts became a mystery. According to some versions, he settled somewhere in Europe, most likely in Greece, since he had the right to obtain citizenship of this country on his father's side and knows the local language well. In 1984, twins Grace and Laura Holland were born on September 23rd. They also had another sister. The family lived in the state of Missouri, in the town of Creve Coeur. Dad and Mom were considered quite religious people, and therefore determined Grace to study in a Catholic school. She graduated from it with honors and went to the university for law school. In the university, the girl studied up to a degree in criminal justice. Since her teenage years, she was attracted to this niche and respected the work of law enforcement. When she was 15 years old, she even organized some detective games with her friends and investigated fictional crimes. After studying at the Institute, Grace paid more attention to her personal life. There was a favorite man whom she married and gave birth to 4 children. The account of the woman in the social network abounded with photos with her children in different angles, places, and periods. In 2015, 2016, her marriage weakened and a lover appeared, a strong and brave captain from the Maryland County Fire Department. His name was Robert Downes, and he was considered a local celebrity, and many women here wanted to have an affair with him. But Grace was the lucky one. The captain had built a long and successful career, making useful contacts in the police, prosecutor's office, and rescue service. His brother David helped him make connections. The latter himself had previously served on the St. Louis Police Department as an officer, but was expelled in 1998 for second-degree sodomy. The officer resigned 3 weeks away from a formal prosecutor's office charge. That's how no mark of conviction on the relevant article appeared on his record. David died in 2016, and his service record showed an impeccable career with no misdemeanors or incidents, though it was clear that the record had been thoroughly sanitized. In addition, the brothers had a family business, the company Liberty Art Works, founded by their father and specialized in creating monuments to the heroes of modern times: military, police officers, doctors, firefighters, and rescuers. After his brother's death, Robert was promoted to vice president and continued the business even more successfully. And the company's services were utilized by many law enforcement and security agencies in the state. Backstopper Concern was considered one of the elite clients, providing financial assistance to the families of fallen lifeguards. Before meeting Grace Holland, Robert was also in a marriage in which he had 1 child. After the divorce, his ex-wife married a detective from the county police. However, her communication with her ex continued, and at the same time he met with her new husband. The couple met, already having the experience of family life of divorce behind them. Their relationship developed rapidly, and in 2020, they bought a house and improved it for a long time. But it never came to marriage. Laura, Grace's sister, described the union as extremely unstable, although superficially it abounded in happiness. There was a storm and a calm at any given moment. The following factors and events stood out: Robert's inadequate control, strictest accounting of expenses, defining his social circle, banning friends, rare visits with children from his first marriage. One day, Grace's best friend sneaked Robert out to dinner at a restaurant. What exactly happened there, it is not known. But after that, Grace turned away from many friends, including this friend. Robert forced her to quit her job at Liberty Artworks. On the last point, there is no official evidence, because the name of Grace Holland did not appear in any of the payroll documents of the firm. However, her relatives claimed that Robert made her some payments for work. This relationship had confused Grace, and a special complication brought her pregnancy. The father was Robert. Instead of joy, he arranged a scandal, did not recognize the child, and threatened to leave, and the woman thought about legalizing the union. In response, she received new threats, and once came and the proposal for a deal. She does an abortion and gets $600. Grace refused, which caused a storm of indignation from Robert, who did not want to become a father again. On a wave of stress, the woman had a miscarriage. In May 2020, Grace plunged into depression, often locked in the bathroom, and cried. On one of those days, Laura found her in a sad state. Her sister was holding a gun and wanted to shoot herself. The episode extremely upset the family Holland, but she did not report to the police, although she was well aware that the hysterics led to physical and moral violence, Robert showed. One such case occurred on June 20th, 2020. That evening, the negligent suitor beat Grace, threw her on the floor, and dragged her on the floor in the hallway, tearing off her clothes. Multiple bruises were left on the victim's body, on her arms, back, and thighs. Before the end of the same month, another such torture occurred. After it, the woman photographed the injuries as evidence for the investigation of domestic violence. And during the beating, she managed to call her mother, who could hear her screams and cries of the tyrant on the phone. He threatened to kill her, shouted his hatred of such women, and then threw her cosmetics, clothes, and other things out of the window. There was a pause, and the mother persuaded her daughter to call the police urgently. She hesitated. Robert suddenly heard what this dialogue was about and shouted, "Claim all you want. I have all the local police brothers. They won't do anything to me. Everything has been taken care of long ago. And you're going to a mental institution. That's where you belong because you're crazy." The Holland family wondered why Grace continued to live together with such a cruel man, who in society is considered a noble hero, a lifesaver, but in the home behaves like a true maniac. Laura, knowing about the tyrant's connections in the police and related structures, decided to contact the press to publish an article with a huge headline about the domestic abuser, Robert Downs. Of course, the media denied the request at the time, believing the woman was protecting her sister's guilty conscience. Laura wrote a statement to the county police as well. No one responded to her appeal as she had hoped. It described that her sister, after another act of violence against her, talked to a medical professional, complaining about Robert's pain and behavior, especially violent, on June 24th, 2020. Laura also had in her possession an audio recording that Grace had made discreetly at the moment of another scandal, believing it to be a strong piece of evidence proving Robert's inadequacy and rage. The tyrant didn't realize that the tape recorder had recorded his antics. And on the recording clearly sounded his words, "I do not want to be near you. You do not deserve even a small percentage to go to bed with me." He went on to claim that his date sat at home all day doing nothing, while he worked all day and night for her. At these moments, Grace wanted to argue that he had forbidden her to earn money and told her to quit. But in response to his indignation, she only confessed her love for him and wished him luck in his service. He became even more angry, called her a fallen and crazy woman, and left the room, slamming the door powerfully. On July 20th, Robert expressed his cumulative grievances with Grace in 3 messenger text messages. "I wish you were out of my life forever. Even when I'm in a hotel, I can't sleep knowing you're sleeping in my house. I hate you so much, and that hatred grows bigger every day." On July 21st, Robert came home in the evening, very tired. Grace was lucky that there had been no further violence. At approximately 10 p.m., they were lying on the bed. The tyrant was surprisingly kind and friendly. The woman took a couple of selfies. The pictures show the couple smiling and looking happy, as if there had been no scandals and beatings. A picture of reconciliation and mutual happiness was created. However, 7 hours later, the 911 service received a horrifying call from Robert, who reported that Grace had shot herself. Local police officers promptly arrived on the scene and recorded in the report the time of discovery of the corpse, 5:23 a.m., cause of death, a gunshot wound to the head, incompatible with life. A little later, experts, ballistics, and pathologists also worked hard. The report states that the shot was fired with the right hand. The bullet went through the left temple, traveled a little to the right, and lodged at the back of the head. The woman, according to the official version, had no chance of survival. The detectives who arrived on the scene were familiar with Robert, conducted a brief surface interview with him, and recorded his version of what happened. Grace was severely depressed because of the miscarriage, often resorted to the bottle, used a lot of sedatives, could not come to terms with the loss. Last night, he was in the living room. His beloved came out of the bedroom and hugged him. Without saying anything, she went back to bed. He didn't go with her, and immediately a gunshot rang out. Running into the bedroom, the man found Grace's corpse with a gun in her hand. There was a pool of blood under her head. It was this testimony that went into the detective's report and was later given to the medical examiner as well. The Holland family, they claim, learned that about 8 hours later, Robert Downs arrived at the Crèvecoeur police station with an attorney and put a second version of events in writing. The picture now presented itself as follows. He and Grace were lying on the bed in the bedroom. She went out, returned 10 minutes later, hugged him. He explained that it was already required to get ready for work, and for some reason, it was on the right side of the passport that came up to him for a hug, looked at him with a sad look, said goodbye, went up to the second floor, and then a gunshot rang out. Robert Downs was questioned at the station by a detective. The statement was videotaped. Only then, that videotape mysteriously disappeared. Crèvecoeur Township Police. Captain Jeffrey Hartman did not deny that the video was indeed recorded, only that technical glitches in the system caused it to be accidentally deleted. Eventually, based on the initial testimony and subsequent expert reports, detectives initiated a fairly short investigation that became more of a formality. On August 4th, it was initiated and completed. It began with a call from Robert Downs. Investigator Charles Parker warned the one that the police would soon come to his house to collect evidence. It is desirable to furnish everything in the house so as to indicate the depressive state of the deceased, and the officers would only pay attention to the right details. I also told him what to delete on his phone so it wouldn't raise questions. And the search and interrogation became a deliberate production. As a result, the police agreed with the reports of forensic specialists. Grace shot herself against a background of prolonged depression. The investigation is over. Case closed. Grace's relatives did not agree with such an arrangement and the lightning-fast closure of the case. In their opinion, it was Robert Downs who was to blame for the death of the unfortunate woman. Of course, such a position required hard evidence, and to collect them, a private detective was hired. An independent investigation was organized. Laura noted that the police were surprisingly clever and quick to work, collected suitable and eliminated inconvenient evidence. Angry twin sister tried to alert the public and arbitrary justice and reveal what the true nature of Robert Downs. To this end, a huge story was posted on social media, available to all users, detailing the arguments and evidence that the investigation was fabricated. Robert was never once seen by investigators as even a potential suspect, probably because of his connections in police circles. The facts of violence on the part of Douse towards Grace are not included in the case. They're hidden, and the man is presented as white and fluffy. The bullet was in the left temple of the deceased, although the woman has always been right-handed. She had learned to handle a gun and held it in her right hand. It was extremely uncomfortable to fire a bullet into her left temple. The shot was most likely fired by another person with a dominant right hand. The evidence was collected surprisingly quickly and in small quantities. Some evidence was somehow not preserved. Forensics did not examine the dead woman's hands for traces of gunpowder, which remain after a gun is used. The necessary analysis was not done before the corpse was taken to the morgue. During transportation, the traces could have been rubbed off, and the experts made different results. Robert Downes' hands and clothes were not immediately checked at the scene. There could have been gunpowder residue on them. The Crèvecoeur Police Department lost valuable video files, potential evidence of Douse's guilt, for ridiculous reasons. The investigators behaved overly polite, even friendly, to the person being questioned. They should not have been allowed to participate in the investigation because of their warm relationship with the defendant. Robert stated to the investigation that when Grace died, he was at arm's length from her and did not provide any help, although he is professionally skilled in bringing people to their senses in difficult situations. The publication was read by several thousand people on the first day. Public discontent was building up. Many users sympathized with the Holland family and agreed with the announced claims, urged not to give up and seek justice. However, Grace's relatives did not plan to retreat. At first, the Hollands, dissatisfied with the justice system, appealed to the local police department, even though they realized the chances were slim. The request was obvious: to reopen the investigation into Grace's death and to scrutinize Robert Downes' involvement in it. There has been no response from this office for months. It is possible that the petition that was filed also suddenly disappeared in these Bermudas. It was already 2023, and Holland's family filed a lawsuit in court. The cause of action was negligent homicide. Also charged by the family, Robert Downes with systematic violence, moral and physical. He either shot Grace himself or drove her to suicide. The lawyer of the accused categorically disagreed with such claims and assured that the client is pure as a baby. He agreed only with some points in the suit. Robert did not want to have children with Grace. In his opinion, Downes took care of the woman, provided for her and paid her for some work and could not take her life. And her family, on the background of severe emotional shock, made up some detective and looking for guilty where they are not. And soon the lawyer asked the court to file a motion not to reopen the investigation and ignore the Hollands' appeals. And indeed, there was silence for months. The family already feared that the court was as lax as the Crèvecoeur police. An unexpected shift occurred in December 2023. Captain Hartman of the same police department petitioned the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office to review Grace Holland's death. And the authority did not protest, and its investigators were already in a few days examining the records of that case. The work went on, the available facts and Holland's testimony were examined, and almost 3 weeks later, in the town of Crèvecoeur, a new incident with an old defendant took place. On January 13, 2024 at 6:39 a.m., 911 received a call from Robert Downes, who asked for an urgent arrival of medics to his house, as his new girlfriend is in serious condition. The tyrant's new girlfriend was Dr. Sarah Sweeney. She was found by arriving police and doctors already dead. The report stated that there were no visible signs of trauma. The girl died of sudden death. Forensic experts have not yet provided any conclusions, although they have conducted an autopsy. A toxicology analysis was also conducted, and it took at least 4 to 6 weeks to get its results. In November 2022, orthopedist Sarah Sweeney filed an appeal in civil court citing health problems that are deadly under certain circumstances: bone disease, mast cell activation, which caused the woman to be hospitalized and intubated in 2021. When mast cells become overactive, a dangerous syndrome occurs that can lead to fatal anaphylactic shock, and emergency treatment is required. According to Sarah's mother, her daughter always carried a special syringe with the drug EpiPen. This device perfectly helped to improve the condition and eliminate serious allergic reactions. The family of the deceased is still waiting for the official conclusions of experts and is not in a hurry with conclusions. Nor did the police say whether Sarah had the syringe with her when her body was found. Time passed, and Robert Downs was not even accused as a suspect in the deaths of Grace Holland and Sarah Sweeney. Perhaps the autopsy on the latter's corpse would help advance the investigation into the former's death. Meanwhile, the federal news has already reported that a reinvestigation has revealed that Grace did not kill herself. She was shot in cold blood by someone. Fox News Channel began covering the deaths of the two women for the entire country, and a St. Louis County police press officer said the interim results of the investigation are already in the prosecutor's office. And Grace Holland's death is being treated as a suspicious death. The investigation is ongoing, and now all initiative to move the case forward and potential charges are the prerogative of the prosecutor's office. Curiously, the Creve Coeur police, and in particular Captain Jeffrey Hartman, still insist that Grace shot herself. This he has publicly stated to the press nationwide. The Holland family doesn't believe it. And after Sarah Sweeney's death under strange circumstances, they believe that Robert Downs has at least 2 murders on his conscience. Most people in the community agree with this point of view. Both Sweeney and Hollands are eagerly awaiting the results of the examination and hope that there will be no forgery. And then their version will probably be confirmed. And if not, it means that someone is lying in this story and at a high level.